Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and GameFound over the next week. If you're new to the channel, we do this every week going over all the upcoming campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is definitely the place to be. But if you want to see a little bit more into the future, Alex over at Board Game Co. puts out a video at the end of each month going over the following month and letting you know of all the games that we know about so far. We are just about getting to the end of January, so he should have his video up for February really soon, and we have been coordinating back and forth trying to make sure that we have all the games that we know about so far up to date so that he's getting you the most up to date info as possible. Of course, these dates can always change, and they do, and there's also a ton of games to get announced during the month as well, which is why I do these videos every week, so you can always come back here to get updated on any changes that happen throughout. I don't have any big news or announcements to go over this week, so we can just get straight into the campaigns, so let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on January 30th, and this one's called Fork, and this plays 2 to 6 players. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes to play, and this one is a really interesting trick-taking game. And the thing that sets this one apart from other trick-taking games is that you don't actually have any values on the cards in this game. Instead, you're actually using the food chain in order to determine which cards are greater than the others. This means that you're going to be trying to earn victory points by having the card that you played eat one of the other cards played that round. But what makes using the food chain so interesting here is that you have 4 different cards. You have the fox, the rabbit, the owl, and the kale. The fox can eat the rabbit or the owl, whereas the owl can only eat the rabbit, and the rabbit can only eat the kale. And of course, the kale doesn't eat anything. So even if you were to play a fox or an owl at the top of the food chain, but then everyone else played kale, then you're not going to be gaining any victory points that round. But the way that this game works is that each player gets a fox card, and then all the other fox cards are removed from the game, and then each player is going to be dealt a hand of cards. At the start of each round, the active player is going to be choosing a terrain type, and you can think of the terrain type as the type of suit for the cards that you're going to be playing for that round. The players are going to want to play the chosen suit if they want to be able to score victory points. Otherwise, they might use that as an opportunity to throw away some of their lower valued cards. But another really interesting aspect of this trick-taking game is that it also incorporates bluffing, because when you go to play your card, you're going to be putting it face down on the table unless it's a kale, and if it's a kale, that's the only card that you're going to be playing face up. This does give you a bit of a benefit for going last during a round, which will change up your strategy. Once all players have played their cards, you're going to be flipping them all face up, and then the player with the highest up in the food chain is going to choose one of the other cards to eat if there is another card that they are able to eat. The interesting thing about eating another player's card is that not only do you gain that card as a victory point for the end of the game, but you've also removed their card from the pool, which means that they're not going to be able to use their card to eat another one. So essentially, you've also prevented them from being able to get a point. And one thing to note about the fox is that it has a wild suit, so you can be playing it on any terrain type. But if more than one fox card is played on a round, they're going to spook each other and all the foxes are discarded. Since each player just has one fox card, you'll want to keep an eye on when the players are playing those cards so you know when it's safest to play your own. The first player to gain 5 cards is going to trigger the end of the game, and then players will be adding up the victory points on each of their cards to determine which player has the most victory points, and that player will win the game. I'm always impressed by these trick-taking games that really bring something new into the genre, so if this one looks interesting to you, you can find links in the description below, and you can click that link to get notified. Also launching on the 30th, we have TENTRICKS, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play, and this one is not a trick-taking game. Instead, this is a game that plays very similar to the game Tetris, which I think most of us are familiar with, where players are going to be trying to position different shapes onto their board while they try to be the last one eliminated. Players are going to be queuing up different shaped tokens that they're going to have to try and fit in their board, but unlike Tetris, if you complete a full line, that doesn't clear the line for you. Instead, it just means you're being more efficient with your placement. And the reason you want to be efficient is because as soon as one of your pieces hits the limit bar at the top of your board, that's going to eliminate you from the game. But of course, it's never quite as simple as that, because there are also ability cards that you can use throughout the game, and you can use these to help yourself or hinder your opponents, such as by raising or lowering that limit bar, or affecting which shapes will appear or be removed from a given board. And of course, if this one interests you, you can find links in the description below. And the next campaign we have launches on January 31st, and this one is Andromeda's Edge, and this plays 1 to 5 players. It takes about 40 to 200 minutes to play, and this one is also our Discord pick of the week, winning with exactly 43 sliced kiwis. And it's no surprise because this game is designed by the same designer and is the spiritual successor to the game Dwellings of Elder Eldervale, which is a game that gets a lot of praise, and it's probably somewhere in my top 20 games of all time, and it's never leaving my collection, which is a pretty good reason for this one to be my own personal pick of the week. And if you're familiar with Dwellings, you will see a lot of similarities with this game. There are some interesting changes to this game that Dwellings doesn't have, but then there's also some features that Dwellings of Eldervale has that this one doesn't. And I don't think the differences between these two games makes one vastly better than the other. My recommendation would just be to go for the one that you think has the better theme, or the theme that will allow it to get played more with your play group. And just like Dwellings of Eldervale, this one is a worker placement where players are going to be choosing asymmetric factions that each have different abilities and powers, and each faction is going to have 4 different worker types, and in Andromeda's Edge, these workers are starships. And these different starships can have some different placement rules or even some different abilities depending on which faction you're playing as, but then they can also have different power values because you can get into combat in this game. And just like in Dwellings of Eldervale, if you have a base unit out on the board and you have the resources to do so, you can perform an action in order to turn that unit into a building, and that will score you victory points as well as some other benefits, but it also removes one of your workers from your worker pool since you've essentially converted it into a building, which is a really fun mechanism that I'm happy to see transferred over to this game. Each tile represents a different planet, and these different planets will have different actions associated with them, and in order to perform these different actions, players are going to be taking turns choosing one of their units that they have available and then choosing a tile to go put it out on the main board. And these actions can do different things like gain or convert resources, which are used to perform most other actions in the game, and some of these other actions can be gaining more ships, converting ships into buildings, gaining different one-time use ability cards or objective cards which can score you victory points at the end of the game, or even gaining you different action tiles which you'll be attaching to your player board, which will give you additional actions when you decide to take all your workers back. Because that is the other option that players have on their turn. Instead of putting one of your workers out onto the board, you can instead choose to take all your workers back, and when you do that, you're going to have a few different action spots on your own player board, including those tiles that I just mentioned, where you'll be able to assign those workers and take bonus actions. And this is one of those things that makes this game a lot different from most other Euros out there, because you don't actually have rounds in this game. Instead, you're just choosing to put a worker out or to take all your workers back, and you can do this on any turn. There's no pattern to this, and players aren't necessarily doing these things at the same time. And yes, this means that there's also no cleanup phase, which is another nice break from your typical Euro game. Players are going to be scoring victory points throughout the game as well as at the end of the game, but something to note here is that the different tiles out on the main board are going to be each associated with a different color, and the different tiles that you take to attach to your own personal board are also going to be associated with a certain color. And anytime that you build a building on one of the planet tiles, or anytime that you take one of those action tiles into your hand, you're going to be moving up the associated track that matches that color. And this acts as a multiplier for that color so that you're going to be scoring more victory points the more that you invest in it. But unlike Dwellings of Eldervale, these tracks also have all sorts of bonuses on them, so as you're moving up that track, you're going to be gaining those bonuses. Anytime that 2 players end up on the same tile, that's going to trigger a battle, and the way that battles work in this game is that each of your ships is going to be associated with a certain amount of dice, and the more ships that you have there, you're going to be able to roll more dice on your side of that battle. And only the highest valued die counts in the battle, but if you are a tie, you're going to be falling down to the next highest and the next highest, so on and so forth, until someone breaks the tie and wins that battle. But unlike in Dwellings of Eldervale, you'll actually be able to re-roll any values that are lower than the number of ships that you have in that battle, which is going to give you an extra advantage for having more ships in the battle. And if you have any ships adjacent to the tile that you're currently fighting on, you do have the option to call those in and add their strength to your battle. The player who loses is going to have all their ships end up in the scrapyard, and you don't lose those ships, but when you recall them back, you're not allowed to place those on any of your action spaces, but you will be compensated with some other options instead. And another new mechanism that wasn't included in Dwellings of Eldervale is the addition of the event track. And the way that this track works is that it's going to be moving upward each time that players take certain actions, and anytime it reaches the end of that track, it's going to get reset to the start of the track, but it's also going to cause the players to draw an event card. The event card can introduce different rules or effects or even scoring opportunities, but it's also going to trigger a new tile being added to the board. And finally, it's also going to trigger scoring for a particular color, so players that did invest in that color will be able to score their victory points for it. And the game continues like this until the end of the game is triggered, and then players will do one more round of scoring, then the player with the most victory points wins the game. And if you are interested in this one, you'll definitely want to follow along because you'll get an additional faction added to your pledge completely for free. And I do recommend following along with this game because I'm sure there's going to be a ton of content coming out soon that's going to get you really hyped, and it might be a game that you'll want to jump in on. But also, in the interest of just providing you the best info as possible, don't forget that you can just go ahead and buy Dwellings of Eldervale right now. And I'm pretty sure they still do offer all the Kickstarter content, so you won't be missing anything if you want to go all in. And you might prefer one or the other depending on how much you like or dislike the changes between these games. But like I said, I don't think the changes are significant to make one vastly better than the other, so I would just recommend going for the one with the theme that you like the most. And also launching on the 31st, we have Alynthia, and this plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 60 to 150 minutes to play. And this is a Euro game that can be played competitively or cooperatively, but the premise here is that you and the other players are playing as different factions that are trying to fight back against a force of dragons that are taking over the world. And these factions do play a little bit differently from each other with some different abilities and benefits, but players are each going to have 2 different player boards. One's going to be tracking your stats and resources, while the other one is acting kind of as your skill tree, where you're going to be able to upgrade different aspects of your faction like their strength, defense, resource collection, or special abilities. Players will be setting up the board with some randomized tiles with different terrain on them, and then depending on the difficulty that you want to play, you're going to be putting out a certain number of dragon nests. The game plays over 5 rounds, and at the start of each round, you're going to be rolling dragon dice for each of those nests, which will increase the strength of that nest anywhere from 1 to 3. And the interesting thing about this is that if a nest gets over a certain value, it's going to be spitting out those excess dragons. These dragons will spill into the different terrain around the nest, attacking other players or bases that the players have built. But each player is going to have a certain amount of actions that they can perform within a round, and players are going to be taking turns performing their different actions, placing or moving workers out on the board, using those workers to collect resources, spending those resources at the market in order to upgrade their stats or skill tree, or even to gain prestige, which I will come back to in a minute. Players will also be able to spend their resources to build outposts on any of the tiles that they occupy. And this is going to allow them to generate resources of a certain type depending on the terrain that they build that outpost on. And building these outposts does net you a certain amount of prestige, which I'll just come back to now because the next action you can perform is to fight a dragon. But in order to fight a dragon, you need a certain amount of prestige, because no dragon's going to bother trying to stick around and fight with you unless that dragon thinks you are worthy to battle. Of course, you're also going to want as much strength as possible because that's going to heighten your odds of actually winning your fight against that dragon. Because each dragon involved in the battle is going to be adding a certain amount of strength that will increase each round. But then you're also going to be rolling a dragon die that will be adding additional strength to those dragons. This works very similar to the players, where each of your characters is going to be adding a certain amount of strength. And then you're also going to be rolling your own die and then performing different abilities and actions using cards and abilities that you might have with your faction in order to try and increase your strength as much as possible. And in order to win the game, you need to destroy all the dragon nests before the end of the game, but you also have to destroy a nest every single round, and if you fail to do either of those, then you lose the game. But in the competitive mode, it is all about gaining victory points, so instead of fulfilling those requirements, it's just the player with the most victory points at the end of the game who wins the game. And also launching on the 31st, we have another really exciting campaign, and this one is the Search for the Lost Species. This plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 60 to 75 minutes to play, and this one is really exciting because it's also the spiritual successor to a game that's been getting a lot of love in the board game community, which is the Search for Planet X. So if you were a fan of this game, or if you heard about it and you were interested in it, this new game builds upon that framework, but with a new theme where players are going to be searching for lost species of animals. Players are going to be using their deduction to try and locate different animals on a shared map, as well as trying to locate that lost species first. Players are also each going to gain their own paper version of the map, as well as some starting clues, and they'll be able to use that and write on it in order to keep track of the different terrain and info that they gather, as well as cross out or mark any animals that they were able to deduce through the process of elimination. Each animal is going to behave a little bit differently in the way that they give clues as to what can be around them, and there's going to be 4 base animals that are present in every single game, but then there's going to be 6 different lost species, and each of these lost species come with their own set of rules and behaviors, and you're only going to be choosing one of those for each game. Players will be using an app in order to generate the different permutations as well as to perform certain actions. And each player is going to be taking turns performing one action per turn. And this action might be to move around on the board in order to survey different locations that you visit to gain information on a particular animal's presence or for the presence of animals adjacent to that location. Players can also visit towns to gain cards with bonus abilities or endgame scoring potential, but each time a player takes an action, they're going to be moving up the expedition track. The expedition track is located around the perimeter of the board, and the more powerful actions you take will move you further along the track. This is important because there's no set turn order in this game. Instead, it's the player who's furthest behind who's going to have the next turn. But also on the expedition track, there is the expedition marker, and once all the players have passed that marker, it's going to trigger an event card to be drawn, and these cards can allow new scoring opportunities or just grant new clues that are available to all players. The expedition marker will then move up to the next position on the board, and a new event card will be drawn as soon as all the players pass that marker again. Players are going to be gaining victory points for successfully discovering any of the animals out on the board, as well as completing any of the scoring objectives that were presented throughout the game. But on your turn, if you think that you have enough information to guess which tile the lost species is located, you can try and take that guess. Guessing correctly will gain you 12 points, and if any of the other players can also guess correctly, they'll also gain some points, but not quite as much as you. The catch here is that this is a very powerful action and moves you really far up the expedition track, so if you don't guess correctly, it's going to be a while till you get your next turn. But if anyone guesses correctly, it does trigger the end of the game, and the player with the most victory points wins the game. And launching on February 1st, we have Microbots Duel, and this plays 2 players and takes about 15 to 45 minutes to play. And this game does have the strength of a BattleBot because it has waterproof, bendable, anti-tear PVC cards, and it is also a very small game that fits into a tin, so you can travel along with this wherever you might go. But in this game, each player is going to be choosing their own BattleBot with their own unique cards and powers, and then each turn you're going to be choosing a card from your hand and then simultaneously revealing. Cards can be support actions or combat actions, but each card is going to have an initiative value, and whichever card is revealed with the lower initiative value is going to be the player that gets to perform their action first. Depending on if it was an attack card or a support card, it's going to be going into one of the rows either on the left or right side of your battle board, and the reason that this is important is because some of the actions on that card can actually be upgraded depending on how many cards you have in that row. This means that certain cards will be a lot more powerful later in the game, but each of the cards can have multiple actions on them, and if those actions are instant, you're just going to do them right away, and you have to do the actions in order. But if that action is an action that you can play anytime, then it just gets added to your tableau that you can use anytime, but of course you will have to pay the associated cost in order to activate it. Most of the actions will allow you to move your bot in different directions or attack the opponent player. Each player also has 6 attack tokens ranging from 0 to 5, and these are one-time use, so when you do use them they do get discarded, but there is an action you can perform in order to get those back. But when a battle does occur, each player is going to be choosing one of these tokens and putting them face down, but then you're going to be simultaneously revealing them in order to have them affect your battle. The action that you perform to get these back not only gets your tokens back, but it also grants you energy, which acts as the currency in this game. Of course, performing this action does leave you vulnerable, so you will want to be careful when you perform that action, and energy can also be spent to acquire upgrade cards from the supply to add permanent upgrades to your BattleBot. The first player to reduce their enemy's bot's health down to 0 wins the game. Also launching on February 1st, we have an expansion to the game Minigolf Designer, which plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play, and this expansion is called the Minigolf Empire Extension. And if you're not familiar with this game, this is a game of tile placement, where at the start of the game, players are going to be drawing a land card, and this is going to put restrictions on how players are allowed to lay out their tiles, but then you're also going to be drawing 2 client cards, which are going to add scoring objectives that players are going to be trying to achieve. Of course, the game also has a base set of scoring objectives that are present in every game, but these ones are going to be a little bit special and can change from game to game. Players are going to be drawing and placing tiles within the restrictions of that land card, while also trying to fulfill as many of those objectives as possible. Doing so is going to gain you more victory points, which will hopefully win you the game, and this new expansion is going to be adding new design challenges for players to try and achieve, as well as a campaign mode and even event cards. So if this one sounds interesting to you, or if you own the game already and are looking for an expansion, You can find links to this one in the description below. And now launching on February 3rd, we have the Adventures of Dex Dixon, and this plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 45 to 90 minutes to play, and this is a scenario-based strategy game set in a film noir horror world. And this is a campaign that I thought was launching a few months back, but it got pushed back until now, as many campaigns do. So I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this is a game that offers a ton of variability from game to game because each of the scenarios can offer you a different mode of play, such as cooperative, competitive, or even elimination, but they also vary wildly in their themes. So one game you might be trying to cure a disease through resource collection, while another might have you chasing a criminal through different dimensions. But players are each playing as different gang leaders, and at the start of the game you're going to be choosing your character, each with their own unique powers and abilities that can be upgraded with cards that you draw throughout the game. But you can also recruit other characters to your crew that also come with their own special abilities. And players will be taking turns performing a number of actions on their turn, and you can do different things like move, draw more cards into your hand, recruit new members to your team, attack other players, or even spend the points you have to play cards or abilities. Movement in this game is done through dice rolling, but the catch here is that you can split your movement points across all your characters, and if you roll doubles, it actually allows you to roll again and get an additional movement. Combat in this game is pretty simple, where players will be rolling dice, adding any modifiers, and then the player with the highest value wins. But where the game gets really interesting is with its wide array of cards that can have instant or lingering effects. And there's 4 different types of cards that players can gain. There's the gear cards that will allow different tools and weapons that you can attach to your characters. But you can only have 2 of these attached to your character at a time, so you'll want to trade those out as you get better items. And then there's power cards, which you can kind of think as a spell that can help or harm other players, and you'll be able to choose which player gets affected. And then there's the artifact cards that have super powerful special abilities, but you can only apply 1 to a character, but you can also trade this in and out with other artifact cards if you happen to find something that is better for you at that time. And then there's the event cards that can affect the game for better or worse that players may want to play to manipulate the rules of the game in their favor. And if the players are able to complete the objective of the scenario, whether it's cooperatively or competitively, then that player or players will win the game. And those are all the campaigns I have for you this week, but don't leave yet because we still have a couple awesome giveaways to announce, and these are the easiest giveaways to enter ever. All you have to do is leave a comment down below. You don't have to like, you don't have to subscribe or do any of those fancy things, although I do appreciate it, and it does help get more recognition for the channel, which helps me get more giveaways so I can do more of this. So yeah, you should probably subscribe. But this first giveaway is going to be for a pledge for Batman Escape from Arkham Asylum, currently launched on GameFound. And if you're not familiar with this game, this is a game where you're actually going to be playing as the villains, and you are trapped in Arkham Asylum, and you're going to be trying to escape. You're kind of going to be working together, although the villains can have their own special objectives that they might be trying to fulfill, as villains do. So don't be too surprised if the allies throw you under the bus, figuratively or literally. Of course, the heroes of Arkham, including Batman, aren't just going to stand aside while you all escape a prison, so you can expect them to make an appearance as well, and it'll be up to the players to work together or not to try and thwart those heroes. And this giveaway is going to be for the Henchman Pledge, which gets you the core game as well as all the stretch goals. And if you're a fan of DC, not only are you getting a fantastic game here, but you're also just getting a whole bunch of cool miniatures to add to your collection. And to enter this giveaway, just leave a comment down below, and I want to know which Batman was your favorite. Not necessarily the movie, but just which Batman. I mean, there's a lot of iterations of Batman, both in the comic books as well as the movies and different spin-off series and things like that. The Christian Bale movies were some of the best Batman movies that I've ever seen, in my opinion, but I really did like Robert Pattinson's version of the Batman. I really liked the brooding, more vulnerable, introvert type Batman, maybe just because I can kind of relate to it. But I'm also kind of curious if anyone liked the Ben Affleck Batman. Leave a comment down below with the hashtag Batman, and I'll draw a winner in next week's video. And we do have a second giveaway this week, and this is Roll for the Great Ones, a roll and write game. And this is a cooperative roll and write, which you don't see too often, where players are going to be playing as asymmetrical investigators, each with a different board that they'll be using to upgrade their abilities throughout the game. And players are going to be drafting dice each round, but the catch is that any of the dice left behind are going to activate the Great One board. And of course, the Great One is your enemy along with the cultists, and the goal of the players is to try and intervene with the cultists' efforts and prevent them from completing their ritual. And this giveaway is going to be for the Great Old One pledge, which is going to get you a physical copy of the game as well as all unlocked stretch goals. And to enter this giveaway, just leave a comment down below with the hashtag GREAT and let us know what the greatest horror is that you've ever seen. For myself, the only thing that really gets me tense is horror video games. Movies and series don't really do it for me, although I do like watching them. I just don't really find that they're that scary. I don't know what it is about video games. Maybe it's just that you're more involved and immersed in the world, but I'm really glad they exist because I do like the occasional fright. And it's probably the older Resident Evils that would have freaked me out the most, but I distinctly remember being very scared of the skeletons and the Shadow Temple in the original Ocarina of Time. Granted, I was like 12, but the quality of my life drastically improved when I learned the Sun Song, and I could just change it to day immediately every time in Ocarina of Time. Maybe I wasn't quite as brave back then. But that is everything I have for you this week. I hope there's some... Oh wait, giveaways. Let's go ahead and draw the winner for last week's giveaway, which was for a pledge for AEGIS Combining Robots Season 2. And to draw a winner, use this application here. All these extra names down here are bonus entries for my Patreon subscribers. If you like this sort of content and you'd like to help support the channel, I do have a link to my Patreon in the description below. Of course, just watching these videos, liking, and subscribing are all free ways to support the channel, and I truly do appreciate that. But if you'd like to do a bit more, I do have a Patreon down below, and I do try to offer more back with the Patreon as well here in the giveaways, and I do try to make a post there at least every week, letting you know even further into the future and my thoughts on the different games that have launched or are about to launch in a following week. Let's go ahead and draw those comments and draw a winner. And the winner is Jasmine Tan, and this is one of our Patreon subscribers, so congratulations, Jasmine. I'll reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a pledge for AEGIS Season 2. And this time, I'm absolutely sure this is everything I have for you this week. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope that there was something that caught your eye in the upcoming campaigns. But as always, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.